The scream never came, but the fear did. It arrived in a single breathless instant when Claire Whitmore, celebrated chief executive of Monarch Systems, leaned toward her assistant in the middle of the Manhattan Hilton ballroom and whispered, trembling, "They are here for me." No one else heard it, yet something in the air shifted as if the chandeliers themselves sensed a storm about to break. Claire's words barely left her lips before the grand double doors slammed open against the marble walls. 3 men in black suits stepped inside with the cold precision of wolves crossing a snowy field, moving in a formation too synchronized to be accidental. Conversation staggered and fell silent. Champagne flutes paused halfway to painted mouths. 100 glittering guests, the richest minds of the East Coast elite, turned to witness danger dressed as evening guests. Claire's pulse hammered at her throat. She had dreaded this moment for weeks, but dread offered no comfort now. A heat rose underneath her skin, battling the ice in her veins. She stood rooted to the glossy floor, her composure slipping like broken glass between shaking fingers. These men knew her. Their eyes said it. She also knew them, though she prayed she was wrong. Her assistant, pale as silk, pressed a hand to her arm and asked if they should call security. But Claire already understood that security would only delay the inevitable. The threats she had received, the messages that predicted her every movement, had not been empty. Tonight, her luck had thinned to its final thread. Across the room, unnoticed in the swirl of panic, Ethan Cole lifted his head from his work. He stood in the shadowed edge of the ballroom, wearing the plain gray uniform of the night shift maintenance crew, holding a tray of half-empty glasses collected from tables where he was never meant to belong. His expression was unreadable at first, almost calm, until he saw the men at the door. A small, imperceptible shift ran through his posture. His grip tightened. The air around him sharpened, as if drawn into a silent command. He was ignored by everyone, but the change within him was absolute. The janitor vanished. Someone far older and far more dangerous stepped quietly into place. The guests closest to the entrance whispered nervously, speculating whether the intruders were protesters or disgruntled shareholders. Their judgments were light, careless, gilded by privilege. They did not recognize the unmistakable discipline of trained operatives, nor the chilling intent that flickered in those strangers' eyes. Claire did. Ethan did. And one of the suited intruders did too, because his gaze swept across the room, brushed the shadows, found Ethan, and froze. His breath hitched. His skin blanched. He muttered something to the man beside him, something sharp and fearful, something that cracked the mask of confidence on all 3 faces. Claire noticed the exchange. A new tremor rippled through her chest. For a heartbeat, she wondered whether they had come for the man in the shadows instead of for her. But the thought dissolved as one of them stepped forward, cutting through the stunned guests with a grim purpose, and her stomach folded inward. She tried to steady herself. She had led negotiations worth billions of dollars, reshaped entire markets, and stared down rivals without blinking. Yet none of that prepared her for being hunted in her own celebration hall. Her voice, usually crisp as glass, faltered to a whisper as she instructed her assistant to find help. The assistant only managed a single step before the intruder's leader raised his hand in warning. Ethan set his tray down with a near-silent click. His eyes were fixed on the men now converging on the center of the ballroom. Something old flickered behind his gaze, something forged in fire and buried under years of forced obscurity. Beneath the dim light, his jaw tightened with a resolve that did not belong to a man paid by the hour to empty trash bins. If anyone had been watching more closely, they might have seen the way his shoulders squared, the way his breath steadied, the way a past no one suspected resurfaced like a blade, rising from deep water. The intruders advanced. Claire's assistant backed away. Claire stood still, refusing to show her fear, though her hands betrayed her by trembling at her sides. She had expected consequences for the deal she had refused to sign, but she had never imagined they would come in such a public, humiliating, inescapable fashion. She braced herself for the confrontation, but then something strange happened. The leader of the intruders looked past her again, past her guests, past the chandeliers, back to that one shadowed figure whose presence should have been insignificant. His expression twisted with disbelief, then terror. He whispered two words that only those closest could hear. Not possible. Ethan heard him. A small breath escaped his lips, not relief, not fear, but something like resignation. A chapter he had buried long ago had been forced open. The moment he had always hoped would never arrive had come on a night when he was meant to be invisible. He remained still, but inside him, every dormant instinct awakened with brutal clarity. These men were not here for the wealthy executives or the glamorous investors. At least one of them was here for him. Claire saw Ethan then, not truly recognizing him, but noticing the way one of the intruders stared at him with a horror that did not fit the situation. Her confusion deepened. Why would a man who terrified her also be terrified of her janitor? The contradiction cracked her fear long enough for her curiosity to spark, and she followed that spark with her eyes. That was when she noticed Ethan's stance. He was not frightened. He was measuring distances, scanning exits, reading threats with a soldier's ruthlessly efficient mind. In that breath of realization, Claire Whitmore understood two truths. First, the danger invading her gala was far greater than anything her security protocols had prepared for. Second, the man, and the entire room dismissed as a background shadow, was not what he seemed. And while she did not yet know his name or his story, the way those armed strangers feared him suggested one thing with chilling certainty. Her fate tonight might depend on the man who was never supposed to matter. Hours before the gala unraveled into fear, Ethan Cole had slipped through the quiet service corridors of the Manhattan Hilton with the ease of a man who knew how to move without being noticed. He arrived just after sunset, pushing his maintenance cart past the banquet staff, who barely spared him a glance. His work shirt hung loosely on his frame, his hair in need of a cut, his boots worn from double shifts. To anyone watching, he was just another overworked employee surviving on stale coffee and underpaid hours. The truth had sharper edges. Beneath that simple uniform lived a man who had once commanded teams in the darkest corners of the world, a man who had vanished by choice, so his daughter could grow up without learning that her father had once been a ghost. Emma Cole sat in the lobby on a soft blue chair, her legs swinging sketchbook open on her knees. She was a small, bright-eyed girl with the kind of smile that softened even the harshest days. Tonight she wore her favorite sneakers and a jacket patched with stars she had sewn herself. When she saw Ethan approach, her face lit up as if the lobby lights had brightened for her alone. She asked when they would be heading home, and he knelt beside her, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. Soon, sweetheart. Just a bit more work and then pizza with extra cheese. The promise made her beam. Emma always believed him, even on nights when exhaustion burned behind his eyes. The silver ring on Ethan's finger caught the glow of the overhead lamps. He twisted it the way he always did when memories tugged too hard. The engraved code, once a lifeline in the field, now served as a reminder of who he could never allow himself to be again. He had chosen anonymity-traded missions for mop strategy rooms, for boiler rooms. His world had narrowed to the size of his daughter's laughter, and that was enough. It had to be. He pushed the cart toward the freight elevator, and forced the past back into its cage. The ballroom above slowly filled with the city's finest. Investors bragged about portfolios, executives gossiped about mergers, photographers snapped pictures under the chandeliers. None of them noticed the silent man carrying boxes of glassware along the side wall. Ethan preferred it that way. Invisibility made life easier. Safety hid in the quiet. But even from a distance, he felt the pulse of tension threading through the air. Something was wrong, though he could not yet place it. The music played, but the undercurrent of unease hummed louder than the violins. Claire Whitmore, draped in elegance and expectation, descended the grand staircase and greeted guests with practiced charm. She smiled when she needed to laugh when the moment required, but her eyes betrayed her. They kept shifting to the entrances, scanning the crowd, with the urgency of someone hunted. Ethan noticed her unease immediately. It was the kind of tension no civilian could mask. She had received threats. He could see it in the way she held her shoulders too straight, too stiff, in the way her hand lingered a second too long on her phone every time she checked it. She looked like a woman waiting for the blow she already knew was coming. Ethan delivered another tray of glasses to a passing server when he felt a shift behind him. The air tightened. Instinct pricked the back of his neck. 3 men in expensive black suits strode across the marble floor with a familiar rhythm, their steps steady, measured, predatory. They blended with the affluent crowd, but Ethan saw past the disguise immediately. Their posture was the first giveaway, their scanning patterns the second. Soldiers once, or mercenaries now. He had known too many like them to mistake the look in their eyes. They were not guests. They were hunters on a time limit. His hand drifted toward the silver ring, again turning it slowly as he assessed their formation. They moved like a triangular blade cutting through silk. He measured distances without thinking, the length of the room exits, security presence, guest clusters, lines of sight. The calculation took only a breath. He whispered to Emma to stay close. His voice had changed, dropping into the controlled calm he had spent years burying. Emma frowned, sensing something, but not understanding. Her world was crayons and bedtime stories. She did not need to know the man he was forced to become in moments like this. The gala swelled with noise, laughter rising over the orchestra. Ethan maneuvered to the edge of the ballroom, pulling Emma into a small alcove, where she could watch the shimmering dresses and polished shoes without stepping into danger. She pointed to a guest wearing a sparkling gown and whispered that everyone looked like princes and princesses. Ethan managed a small smile. "They're just people, sweetheart. Same as us." But he knew that was not entirely true. People here lived in a world untouched by struggle, where money solved problems before they even appeared. They floated while men like him sank quietly beneath their feet. Mark Reynolds, flush with expensive wine, and arrogance, stumbled toward a table nearby. Ethan moved to collect used glasses, hoping to finish quickly and return to Emma. But Mark's drink slipped from his fingers, splashing across the white tablecloth before cascading down Ethan's shoulder. The wealthy man sneered and poured another splash, deliberately mocking Ethan in front of everyone. "That is more for you to clean." Laughter rippled around this, sharp and cruel. Emma watched with wide, hurt eyes. Ethan felt humiliation burn beneath his skin, but he swallowed it. A battlefield taught him restraint. A daughter taught him purpose. He knelt, wiping the mess with steady hands, while the room murmured with condescension. The ring on his finger glinted as his fist tightened, then released. Beside him, Emma trembled. He cleaned in silence, then walked to her, wiping her tears gently with the corner of a towel. Their words do not define us, sweetheart. But she had already absorbed the cruelty into her small chest. Her world cracked a little, and Ethan felt the weight of it pressed down harder than any mission he had ever endured. Across the ballroom, Claire Whitmore saw everything. She opened her mouth to intervene, but before she could step forward, her assistant gripped her arm and whispered that the men were closing in. Claire's breath caught. The strands of her fear tightened into a knot. The moment she had dreaded was finally here. Ethan lifted his head at the same instant. His expression shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. The father faded. The soldier surfaced. And the night, once filled with music and light, began its slow descent into danger. Hours before the gala fractured into fear, Ethan Cole arrived through the quiet service corridor of the Manhattan Hilton, moving with the unhurried rhythm of a man who understood the value of being unseen. The evening staff greeted one another with tired nods, but no one spared more than a fleeting glance toward the maintenance worker pushing a rattling cart filled with cleaning supplies and folded table linens. To them, he was part of the background, a fixture rather than a person. Yet beneath the faded gray uniform lived a man who had once stepped through the most dangerous corners of the world with silent authority. A man who had disappeared so completely that even his former teammates believed the ground had swallowed him. Emma Cole perched in a soft blue lobby chair sketchbook, open legs swinging as she drew the outlines of imagined adventures. She was 9, bright, curious, and blissfully unaware of how much her father had sacrificed so she could live untouched by the shadows that once clung to him. When Ethan approached, her face lit up. She asked when they would go home, and he crouched beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. Soon, sweetheart. Just a little more work than pizza on the way. The promise steadied him more than he admitted. The silver ring on his finger caught the warm glow of the overhead light. He twisted it gently, feeling the engraved code press against his skin like a whisper from a life he had buried. Every mission, every order, every loss locked away behind that ring. He had sworn never to return to that world, not even in memory. All that mattered now was Emma's safety, her smile, and the small, quiet life he had chosen for them both. He pushed the cart toward the freight elevator, forcing the old ache of memory to dissolve. Above them, the ballroom was already humming with opulence. Chandeliers, shimmered floral arrangements perfumed the air, and New York's wealthiest traded polished words and strategic laughter. Ethan maneuvered unnoticed through the edges of the celebration, placing fresh glasses on the tables, while servers whisked past him, balancing trays of champagne. This kind of environment sharpened him in strange ways. The noise was too loud, the pace too bright, the smiles too forced. Something felt brittle in the air, as though the room held its breath. Claire Whitmore. The elegant chief executive, whose name dominated financial headlines, descended the staircase with the poise of someone accustomed to attention. Yet her smile, though perfectly timed, held a tremor at the edges. Ethan watched her for a moment. Her glances were too quick, her posture too stiff, her hand moving repeatedly to check her phone, as if expecting a ghost to appear inside the screen. She was waiting for something, or someone. Ethan resumed his work, but unease tugged at him. The sensation was subtle, a familiar tightening behind his ribs, the instinct he had relied on during operations where silence determined survival. He placed a tray of empty glasses on the cart, then swept the room with a practiced gaze. That was when he saw them. 3 men in tailored black suits entered through the main doors with a rhythm that did not match the music. They walked with a deliberate synchronicity, their eyes scanning in calculated arcs. Guests instinctively stepped aside without knowing why. The men carried themselves not like socialites, but like predators accustomed to measuring threats before striking. Ethan recognized it instantly. He had walked with that same controlled purpose once, in deserts, forests, ruined cities, and places the world preferred to forget. He turned slightly, angling his body, so Emma remained shielded in the alcove beside him. His voice softened, though a deeper note rippled beneath it. "Stay close, sweetheart." She heard the shift, but did not understand its meaning. Her world remained a soft blend of crayons and stories. She had never seen him in the posture he adopted now, alert, steady, dangerous. The ballroom swelled with laughter as the orchestra reached a brighter tempo, unaware of the threat slicing through the crowd. Ethan monitored the men while appearing to fold napkins. Each step they took aligned with a strategy he recognized. They were spreading out, forming a loose containment arc. And their focus, though subtle, drifted again and again toward Claire. Before Ethan could think further, Mark Reynolds staggered toward a table near him, drenched in expensive whiskey and arrogance. Mark's glass slipped from his fingers, splashing across the tablecloth before dripping onto Ethan's shirt. The man sneered and poured another deliberate stream for humiliation. "That is more for you to clean." Laughter rippled cruelly. Emma's face crumpled as she watched. Ethan swallowed the spike of anger, kneeling to wipe the spill, while humiliation tightened in his chest. But he refused to give the man another ounce of satisfaction. He returned to Emma and wiped her tears gently. "Their words do not define us," he murmured, though the cruelty left a quiet bruise inside him. Across the room, Claire witnessed the exchange, her expression tightening with something between frustration and shame. She took a step toward Ethan, but her assistant grasped her arm, whispering urgently that the three men were closing in. Claire's breath caught. The moment she had dreaded finally arrived. Ethan lifted his head at the same instant, instinct flashing in his gaze. The father vanished. The soldier awakened, and the night shifted irrevocably toward danger. The moment the intruders reached the center of the ballroom, silence rippled outward like a shock wave. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence. A violinist lowered his bow, sensing danger with the raw instinct of an animal cornered by a predator. Claire Whitmore found her voice trapped somewhere between her ribs and her throat. The leader of the three men stopped within arm's reach of her, his expression carved from cold stone. She braced herself for whatever demand would follow, but before a word left his mouth, something shifted behind him. One of his companions, stiffened eyes widening as he stared past Claire toward the far wall. His breath faltered. His skin paled. He whispered something urgent into the leader's ear. The leader turned to follow his gaze. Ethan stood there, half in shadow, half in the glow of the chandeliers, his posture deceptively still. The leader studied him for a heartbeat, then another, and Claire watched as disbelief cracked across the man's face. Recognition flared, then fear. Not the cautious kind, but the deep, primal kind that belonged to men who had seen death walk beside them. The leader muttered a hushed curse shock, unraveling the confidence he had carried into the room. Ethan did not move. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet authority that made the air feel heavier. Claire's assistant tried to step between her and the strangers, but the leader lifted a hand in warning, his gaze locked on Ethan, as if Claire had vanished entirely. The sudden shift in threat unsettled her more than any direct attack could have. Why would trained operatives clearly hear for her react, as if the true danger stood behind her, disguised as a janitor? What did they see that no one else in the ballroom did? The answer hovered just outside her grasp, chilling and incomprehensible. Ethan inhaled slowly, feeling the familiar pull of muscle memory. He stepped forward with a calm that disguised the storm building inside him. Emma's presence behind him anchored his restraint, but instinct sharpened every motion. The crowd parted unconsciously, as if responding to a silent command. He reached a distance close enough for his voice to carry. "Let her go." The words were soft, yet they struck the room with the weight of an order. The leader recovered enough arrogance to sneer. "You do not know who you are stepping up to," he said, though his voice betrayed a tremor. Ethan did not blink. The second man tugged lightly on the leader's sleeve, panic creeping into his tone as he murmured, "Look at his hand. Look at the ring." The leader hesitated, then lowered his gaze to Ethan's right hand. The silver ring, once an emblem of a life erased, caught the chandelier's light with a sharp glint. The leader's breath fractured. "No, that is impossible. You are dead." The file said, "You were dead." A murmur rippled through the crowd, though no one understood the meaning behind the words. Claire stared between Ethan and the intruders, trying to piece together the fragments of fear unfolding before her. Ethan stepped closer, his presence steady as stone. The file was wrong. His voice, steady and lethal, settled into the air like a verdict. The second man stumbled backward, his composure cracking open completely. The third man swallowed hard and lowered his gaze, abandoning any pretense of defiance. Claire watched the room shift around her. Investors who had mocked Ethan minutes earlier now shrank into themselves. Executives who prided themselves on power remained frozen. Only Ethan moved with certainty. Mark Reynolds, who had humiliated him ruthlessly, stood speechless, his face drained of color. The realization was dawning on everyone at once. The janitor they had dismissed was a presence far larger than the role they assigned him. The leader gripped Claire's wrist, suddenly desperate to regain control, but his bravado had shattered. Ethan's gaze hardened. "Release her." The leader hissed, "Stay back or she gets hurt." But the threat sounded hollow. Everyone could hear it. Everyone could see the fear blooming behind his eyes. Ethan angled his stance, calculating the distance between them and the angle of the leader's hold the nearest cover the positions of the other two men. Movements played through his mind, with the clarity of muscle memory honed across years of operations. He saw every outcome before it unfolded. Then the unexpected happened. The third man, voice trembling, stepped away from the confrontation entirely. "I am done," he said. "I did not sign up for this." His hands lifted in surrender. The leader spat a furious insult at him, but the second man only shook his head slowly, backing away, as if from a ghost. "Captain Cole?" he whispered, barely audible. The room gasped at the name without understanding its weight. The leader stood alone, panic clawing at his last shred of confidence. Ethan took one more step, and the leader reacted on instinct, releasing Claire, as if she had burned him. Security surged through the crowd, at that moment responding to the commotion. One officer stopped dead when he saw Ethan, recognition flooding his features. Surrey breathed shock, overtaking protocol. Claire turned in confusion. Sir, who was he addressing? Why did seasoned security men look at Ethan with reverence usually reserved for legends? The answer flickered through the room as whispers rose. Captain Cole. The ghost. The operative who had vanished 12 years earlier. Ethan met the officer's stare with a brief nod, then focused again on the leader being restrained. The fear on the intruder's face said everything. The ghost he believed dead was standing 3 feet away in a janitor's uniform, and the balance of power had turned to ash in his hands. The ballroom exhaled as if waking from a nightmare, and Claire realized with a jolt that her life had been saved not by security, not by wealth, but by the one man everyone had overlooked. And the night, though far from over, had already rewritten everything she thought she knew. The ballroom did not recover immediately. Even with the intruders restrained and security forming a protective perimeter around Claire Whitmore, the air still thrummed with disbelief. Guests clung to one another, voices hushed, eyes wide, unwilling to accept what they had witnessed. Moments earlier, they had dismissed Ethan Cole as background noise, a man whose presence blended with the silver trays and polished floors. Now the truth settled over them like dust after an explosion. The janitor was not a janitor. He was something else entirely. Claire steadied herself with a hand on the table behind her, her pulse struggling to find a rhythm. She watched Ethan as he moved away from the restrained men, his expression controlled, his steps measured. He did not look triumphant. He did not look shaken. He looked like someone returning to a role he never wanted, but could never entirely escape. The image unsettled her deeply. Ethan scanned the room as if danger might still be hiding behind silk gowns and tailored suits. Old instincts refused to rest. He spotted Emma tucked safely in the alcove, her eyes wide but shining with trust. She had seen everything far more than a 9-year-old should witness. Yet when he approached, she did not flinch. She reached for his hand. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" she whispered. He knelt and brushed a tear from her cheek. "No, sweetheart. Not anymore." His voice softened, but a shadow crossed his gaze. Trouble, after all, had a way of returning when it found a familiar doorway. Nearby, Mark Reynolds stood rigid shame, spreading across his features like a slow infection. Moments ago, he had poured whiskey onto Ethan's shirt with smug delight, believing the man beneath him both powerless and forgettable. Now he could not meet Ethan's eyes. Nor could the cluster of socialites who had laughed at the humiliation. Their arrogance had withered under the weight of their misjudgment. Security officers moved swiftly, cuffing the intruders and securing their weapons. The lead officer approached Ethan with reverence unfit for a man holding a janitor's badge. "Sir," he said quietly, almost stumbling over the word, "I served under Colonel Hayes in Kandahar. He had a framed photo of your unit in his office. He told stories about you. He said no one carried their team the way you did." Ethan's jaw tightened. He did not want praise. He definitely did not want memories resurfacing. Those stories belonged buried with his old life. "I am not that man anymore," he replied. But the officer shook his head. "With respect, sir, you may not want to be him, but he showed up tonight." The admission struck Ethan harder than expected. His throat tightened. He turned away before emotion betrayed him. Claire stepped toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step gathering resolve. She stopped only a few feet away. "Mr. Cole," she began, though the title felt insufficient for a man who had just dismantled an armed threat with nothing but presence and reputation. "I owe you my life." Ethan lifted his gaze. "You do not owe me anything." He wanted to walk away before the spotlight returned. But Claire wasn't finished. "You stood alone in a room full of people who could have helped, but chose not to. You stepped in when you had every reason not to. That means something." Her voice held sincerity, something rare in rooms like this. Ethan saw no judgment in her eyes, only a strange mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Guests gradually approached, forming a loose circle around them. They murmured his name, unsure how to address someone who had slipped out of legend and into their gala wearing a uniform stained with spilled whiskey. The ex-military attendees understood the weight of what had happened. Some saluted instinctively before catching themselves realizing they were in a ballroom, not a base. Mark finally stepped forward, his throat working around a silent apology. He spoke softly, voice trembling. I behaved shamefully. I am sorry. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Apologies are not for me, he said at last. My daughter heard your words. His gaze shifted briefly toward Emma. If you wish to make it right, start there. Mark's face flushed. He nodded, swallowing the bitter taste of humility. The mood in the ballroom shifted again this time, not with fear, but with an emerging sense of awe. A woman in an emerald dress began clapping. Slowly, at first uncertain, then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the room erupted in applause, a rising, thunderous sound that shook the chandeliers. The ovation was not elegant or polite. It was raw, grateful, stunned. Claire watched Ethan freeze in place, discomfort flickering across his features, as if the applause pressed against old wounds. He shook his head gently at Claire, attempting to halt the noise. But the crowd only grew louder. Veterans in the room stood straighter. Staff members who worked alongside him daily wiped tears from their eyes. Even the hotel manager, who had barely remembered Ethan's name 15 minutes earlier, now clapped with fervor. Claire raised her hands to quiet the room. The applause softened, then faded. Ladies and gentlemen, she began tonight, we witnessed something extraordinary, but not because danger appeared. Danger is mundane. It appears every day in one form or another. What is extraordinary is the courage that stepped forward without hesitation. She turned to Ethan. A true hero does not ask for recognition. He simply acts. The crowd murmured in agreement. Ethan stared at the floor, uncomfortable with every word. Emma reached for his hand again, anchoring him. Claire continued. Real strength does not brag. It hides in plain sight. Real honor is worn quietly in janitors' uniforms, as easily as in military gear. And tonight, every person in this room has been reminded that the greatest power often comes from the place we expect it least. Ethan met her gaze, something unreadable stirring behind his eyes. Respect, caution, gratitude. A complicated blend of emotions he rarely let surface. The applause rose once more, softer now, but deeply sincere. Ethan stood in the center of it all, a man who had spent 12 years avoiding attention, now illuminated by it, without mercy. He lifted Emma into his arms. She wrapped her small arms around his neck and whispered against his shoulder, I knew you were special. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself a breath of stillness. The ballroom shimmered around him, alive with admiration and newfound humility. But beneath the warmth of the moment, he felt a quiet truth settling in his chest. The life he had built so carefully, so quietly, had just been cracked open by the past that he had tried to forget. And nothing about the night would allow it to close again. Police lights still flashed against the glass towers when the last intruder was pushed out of the ballroom, his hands cuffed, his expression twisted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The officers dragged him past Ethan Cole, but the man still managed a final hiss of warning. You cannot hide anymore. Someone will come for you. Ethan didn't react, though. A small tremor passed beneath the surface of his calm. The words weren't a threat. They were a reminder. When the doors slammed and the echoes faded, the ballroom sagged into a hollow silence. The chandeliers that had sparked with elegance now reflected only fear. Guests whispered in fractured tones, unsure how to process what they had witnessed. Moments earlier, they had mocked the janitor. Now they couldn't meet his eyes. Ethan stood at the center of it all, Emma tucked tightly into his arms, her small fingers knotted into his shirt. Her trust steadied him far more than the applause or gratitude spilling from the shaken crowd. People approached executive servers, investors with trembling voices as though hoping a single apology could erase their earlier cruelty. Ethan nodded politely, but there was distance in his eyes. His focus drifted again and again to Emma's face, flushed from fear, though she tried to look brave. He kissed her temples softly. "It's all right, sweetheart. We're okay now." But he wasn't sure. Not anymore. The hotel manager hurried over, wringing his hands, tripping through a clumsy apology for what Ethan had endured. Ethan raised a hand gently. "Treat your people better," he said. "That matters more than apologizing to me." The manager fell silent, chastened. Rosa, the older housekeeper, lingered nearby, her apron smudged her eyes warm. She stepped forward with quiet pride. "I always knew there was something strong in you," she said. "Something they couldn't see." Ethan gave her a small smile. "What matters is that they saw what was needed tonight." Across the ruined ballroom, Claire Whitmore watched him with a storm of emotions shifting beneath her composed exterior. Gratitude, guilt, and a dawning realization that she had walked blindly into danger she had underestimated. She had arrived at the gala believing her intellect and resources could protect her. But when the threat came, it wasn't security protocols or wealth that saved her. It was the invisible man she'd never truly noticed. She approached cautiously. "Mr. Cole, may I speak with you, Ethan?" Shifted Emma in his arms, but nodded. "As long as my daughter stays close." Claire gestured to a quiet alcove where servers offered Emma a drink and gentle smiles. Ethan set her down within reach, then followed Claire into a quieter corridor. For several seconds they stood without speaking, the weight of the night pressing against the dimly lit hallway. "You recognized those men the moment they entered," Claire said. "And they recognized you." Why, Ethan exhaled slowly, jaw tightening. "Because I used to live in the world they came from. And I left it behind. Or tried to." Claire stepped closer, searching his expression. "You saved my life. You saved everyone in that ballroom. Yet you look like the one carrying the heaviest burden." "Because they saw me," Ethan replied, "and I worked hard to stay unseen." Claire's breath caught. "You think they'll come after you who they already have," he murmured. "It started the second they realized who I was." His gaze dropped briefly, the truth chiseling itself into the air between them. "My daughter deserves a father who tucks her in at night, not a ghost hunted by the past." Claire softened. "I didn't mean for Emma to be in danger." "I know. But intentions don't stop bullets." She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the guilt rising in her chest. "People have been threatening me for weeks. Anonymous messages, surveillance attempts. And still, I came tonight. I thought the show of strength mattered more than caution." Ethan studied her, then spoke with quiet intensity. "Pride is a dangerous advisor. It almost killed you." Claire absorbed the words without protest. Then she asked the question, sitting heavy in her mind. "If they recognized you, does that mean someone powerful still wants you found?" His silence was confirmation enough. She took a breath. "Then let me help. Security, resources, whatever you need." Ethan shook his head. "My daughter's safety is my responsibility, no one else's." Claire stepped closer, her voice steady. "Tonight proved survival isn't a solitary act. You pulled me out of danger. Let me return a fraction of what I owe." Ethan held her gaze, the air charged with an unspoken understanding. The storm wasn't over. It was gathering. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he could face it alone. When he returned to Emma and lifted her into his arms, she rested her head on his shoulder with a tired sigh. Claire watched him walk toward the exit, a quiet guardian fading into the night. But she knew this was only the beginning. The world had seen the ghost, and ghosts never stay buried for long. The hotel's upper corridor, once a place of polished calm, now felt like a hallway suspended between two worlds. Claire Whitmore walked beside Ethan Cole, though walking beside was not quite accurate. She moved with the tentative caution of someone approaching something powerful, yet unpredictable. Ethan's strides were steady, but his jaw was tight, as if each step tugged at a memory he wished he could outrun. He kept glancing back toward the banquet staff, watching Emma, and each glance carried the protective weight of a father who had lived too long in vigilance. Inside a quiet conference room, Claire closed the door behind them. The lights glowed softly, casting long reflections along the glossy table. The hum of distant sirens vibrated faintly through the windows. Ethan remained standing, his posture neither formal nor relaxed, but the controlled stillness of a man who measured every breath. Claire felt a ripple of unease, even now. The ballroom had shown her a fragment of who he was. Here in silence, the truth felt even larger. "Tell me what I witnessed tonight," Claire said, her voice low, yet steady. "I cannot protect my company or my people if I do not understand what just walked into my gala." Ethan studied her for a long moment. He did not see fear in her eyes anymore, only a fierce determination that reminded him of commanders who refused to break. Finally, he spoke. "You saw 3 hired guns sent to take you. And you saw men who recognized me from a life I do not live anymore. A life I buried to keep my daughter safe." Claire stepped closer, arms folded, searching his face. "Why were they afraid of you? You said you were not that man now, but clearly that man still exists." Ethan looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening as he weighed how much truth he could afford to reveal. "They knew my unit," he said. "They knew my name. They believed I died in an explosion overseas more than a decade ago, and I let the world believe it." The words hung heavy. Claire absorbed them, slowly astonished by the matter-of-fact tone he used to describe his own erasure. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why disappear?" His eyes softened, though the sorrow behind them remained sharp. "There are battles no soldier walks away from clean. I lost people who trusted me, good people. After that, I had a choice. Keep wearing the uniform and let my daughter grow up with a father who might vanish again, or walk into a new life where she would never hear gunfire in her sleep." He paused, exhaling. "Emma deserved peace. I gave up everything else for her." Claire felt the words like a steady drumbeat against her chest. She admired strength in many forms, but this was something deeper, something stripped of pretense. "And yet," she said, "trouble still found you." "Trouble always finds ghosts," Ethan answered, "especially when someone powerful is reckless enough to drag danger into public view." Claire stiffened. The accusation was subtle but unmistakable. "You think this is my fault?" she asked. Ethan did not soften his gaze. "I think someone warned you. I think you ignored it. I think you walked into a room filled with unprotected people knowing someone wanted you silenced." Claire swallowed each accusation, hitting a nerve she had tried to suppress. Anonymous threats had come for weeks. Her security consultants dismissed them as corporate scare tactics. Her board insisted she attend the gala to project strength. Strength she now realized had nearly gotten her killed. She leaned forward, her voice thinner. "They were after me because of a deal. A merger proposal I refused. It would have handed control of my company to a group of foreign investors with unclear funding. When I pushed back, the threats escalated." Ethan's stare sharpened. "You should have canceled the event." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Canceling the gala would have signaled fear. My board would have questioned my leadership. My rivals would have used it against me. And I believed we had enough security. Ethan stepped closer, his tone edged with steel. You gambled with your safety, not just yours. His voice broke for a fraction of a second. My daughter was in that building. Claire's breath stilled. She had no defense for that. The truth hit with the weight of a stone. She had not only endangered herself, she had endangered a child. I am sorry, she whispered the words, trembling with sincerity. I never meant for anyone else to be caught in the line of fire. Ethan nodded, once the sternness in his face softening slightly. She studied him, seeing beyond the uniform and the mystery. There was something noble beneath his rough exterior, something unwavering and deeply human. You saved me, she said, and I do not even know the full cost of that. He shook his head. Saving you was not a choice. It was instinct. Claire felt something uncoil inside the silence. Gratitude, respect, and beneath it, a growing sense of responsibility. Tell me what happens now, she said. Those men will not stop because one operation failed. Ethan glanced toward the window where police lights flickered across the skyline. No, they will not stop. Someone paid them. Someone expects a result. Claire's pulse quickened. You think they will come again? I think whoever hired them will try something else, Ethan said. Something quieter. Something harder to see coming. Claire sat slowly, the weight of what awaited settling across her shoulders like lead. And what about you? She asked. Are you in danger too? Ethan exhaled, his expression unreadable. The moment they recognized me, that danger returned. And danger attracts more danger. Claire's voice softened. Then you should leave the city. Take Emma and go somewhere safe. Ethan looked directly at her. There is no safe if someone powerful wants you found. A chill slid through Claire's spine. Then what do we do? Ethan considered the question, the silence stretching long enough to sharpen the tension. Finally, he answered. We prepare. We stay ahead of whatever comes next. And you tell me everything about this deal you refused. Claire nodded, resolve hardening like steel being tempered. If she was going to survive this storm, she would need the ghost who had stepped out of the shadows. And Ethan, despite every instinct urging him to remain invisible, knew there was no turning back. The past he had fled was awake again, and now they would face whatever hunted her together. The night outside the Manhattan Hilton had thinned into a pale hush, as if the city itself were catching its breath after the chaos. Police cruisers still lined the curb, their lights dulled to a tired pulse. Claire Whitmore stepped out of the conference room beside Ethan Cole, the weight of everything she had learned pressing heavily along her spine. The hotel corridor felt colder now, quieter. Every sound seemed too sharp, every shadow too long. She glanced at Ethan, noting how his gaze never stopped moving, how every footstep echoed in him like a memory he was trained never to forget. Emma sat near the lobby staircase, drinking juice from a small paper cup, while Rosa, the older housekeeper, hovered beside her. When Emma spotted her father, she rushed over, launching herself into his arms. Ethan caught her easily, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You tired, sweetheart, he murmured. She nodded, clutching his shirt with small fingers, still trembling from the night's fear. Claire watched them, struck again by the fierce devotion that seemed etched into Ethan's very posture. He looked like a man built to carry burdens heavier than most hearts could hold. Several hotel guests approached timidly, offering apologies, gratitude, or nervous praise. Some bowed their heads ashamed of how they had treated him earlier. Ethan acknowledged them politely, but briefly. His attention was fixed on Emma in the path to the exit. Claire followed him into the lobby's open space, where the marble floor reflected the soft glow of late-night lights. She hesitated, then stepped in front of him. "Ethan, wait." He paused. Claire straightened her shoulders, knowing her next words would carry consequences she could not predict. "I cannot face what is coming alone. Whoever orchestrated this attack will not stop. They will adapt, and I cannot protect myself or my company without understanding their strategy. Without you." Ethan absorbed her plea in silence, Emma's breathing warm against his chest. Claire pressed on. "You may want to walk away, but they recognized you. That means they will hunt you now too. Our problems are no longer separate." He shifted Emma slightly, offering her a reassuring squeeze before meeting Claire's gaze. His eyes held resignation, conflict, and something like reluctant acceptance. "I did not plan to be drawn back into this world," he said quietly. "I built a life for my daughter far from it. I wanted her to grow up with ordinary problems, not the kind that carry guns and orders." Claire stepped closer. "I understand wanting to protect the people you love. But hiding will not save you anymore. And it will not save Emma. You know that." He looked away, jaw tightening, as if considering a battlefield he could not see. Emma stirred, sensing the tension around them. "Daddy, are we in danger again?" He wiped a tear from her cheek. "Not tonight," he whispered. But he did not say tomorrow would be safe. Claire softened her voice. "I can give you resources, security, legal protection, whatever you need. But I need your help understanding who is behind this and why they want me removed. If we do not move first, they will strike again." Ethan listened without interruption, weighing every possibility. For years he had survived by avoiding attention, by letting the world believe he no longer existed. Tonight had shattered that invisibility. They had recognized him with only a glance. That meant someone had kept his ghost alive in files he hoped were erased. It meant the past he had abandoned was no longer content to remain buried. He exhaled slowly. "Tell me about the investors you refused. Tell me every detail of the merger, every threat, every unanswered call." Claire nodded. "I have documents, encrypted communications, legal drafts. I can get them to you." Ethan met her eyes again. "If I help you," he said, "I am risking my daughter's safety." Claire felt the weight of his words. "But if you do nothing," she said gently, "you risk it even more." Emma rested her head on his shoulder, eyelids drooping, but comforted by his steady heartbeat. Ethan kissed her forehead and carried her toward the revolving doors. Claire followed him outside into the cool night. Taxis drifted down the street. The city felt quieter than usual, as if it too sensed that something had shifted. On the sidewalk, Ethan paused and turned to her. "I am not returning to who I was," he said. "I will not lead missions. I will not take orders. Those days died with my team." Claire nodded, understanding. "I am not asking for a soldier. I am asking for a man who sees danger before anyone else does. A man who can do what others cannot. A man I trust with my life." The sincerity in her voice reached him more deeply than he expected. Ethan looked up at the hotel windows, at the dark silhouettes of guests who would forget by morning how their lives had almost ended. He thought of how close Emma had been to danger, how fragile the illusion of safety had become. And he thought of the man he had once been, the man buried beneath years of silence. A man skilled not in violence, but in protection, a safeguard in human form. Finally, Ethan nodded. "I will help you. But we do this my way." Claire released a breath she had been holding. Agreed. Emma stirred in his arms again. Daddy, can we go home now? He smiled softly. Yes, sweetheart. We are going home. Claire hesitated before speaking again. One more thing. If they found you tonight, they may know where you live. I can move you and Emma to a secure location until we understand the threat more clearly. Ethan considered this, then shook his head. No, I will move us. No one protects my daughter but me. Claire respected the answer. He stepped toward the curb to call a cab. Claire watched him, overwhelmed by a strange certainty that she had just aligned herself with someone who could change the course of everything. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was willing to be invisible until the moment the world needed him most. As the cab pulled up, Ethan opened the door and settled Emma inside. Before climbing in, he turned back to Claire. Tomorrow, he said, bring everything you have on this merger. Names, dates, threats, every crack in the story. We start there. Claire nodded. Tomorrow. The cab rolled away into the thinning night taillights, glowing like embers drifting toward dawn. Claire stood alone on the sidewalk, realizing the truth settling into her bones. The ghost had stepped back into the world, and now she was no longer fighting her battle alone. Their war had just begun. In the end, Claire and Ethan's story reveals a truth professionals in security and leadership understand well. Real power is rarely the loudest force in the room. It often lives in the unseen, the underestimated, the people who operate with integrity rather than status. Ethan's transformation from invisible worker to decisive protector reminds us that every environment, from boardrooms to ballrooms, contains hidden strengths waiting for the moment they are needed most. If you found meaning or inspiration in this journey, consider liking and subscribing to stay connected with more stories that uncover the extraordinary beneath the ordinary. And before you go, share your thoughts in the comments with a simple phrase that captures tonight's theme of unexpected courage, hidden strength.